I've spent a lot of time listening very carefully to the rhythm of birdsong and trying to write poems that mimic the rhythm as precisely as possible. Sometimes this produces poems that just mean absolutely nothing, and the whole point of that exercise really is to escape it and try and produce a poem that lives in a human voice rather than a bird's voice. This is a poem about a type of bird called a goldcrest. It's the smallest bird in England, and it's about a pair of goldcrests in a kind of courtship. The song of a goldcrest, when you see it written down in a bird book, goes something like this. It goes cedar, 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 si-su-si. Goldcrests. She sings light, he sings lightly from the pine-needled nest cup. He shifts lightly, she shifts light among the burrs in the nest cup. How slightly, how very slight, the sky shrinks to the eggshell hue. How slight, how very slightly light wakes from the eggshell hue. He sees lightly, she sees light in the pine needle dark. She sang light, he sang lightly among the cedars in the dark. When I was in my early 20s, I remember going to a place called the Poetry Bookshop in London, and it was a revelation to me, because at that time of life I was a young scientist, and the world of poetry seemed quite closed to me. I'd never come across Australian poetry before in my life, but there was a lot of Australian poetry there. I remember picking up an anthology and reading pieces by a number of Australian writers and being very struck by the vividness of the writing and kind of the way in which things could be written using a plain voice, an open voice, rather than a kind of a literary voice. So I always kind of aspired to be a kind of quasi-Australian poet myself, and this poem here, called You Were Broken, is actually dedicated to a number of Australian writers. And the thing about this poem, the only thing you need to know about the poem is actually, it's 40 lines long, and it's entirely one sentence, like a kind of big verbal snake going down the page. You were broken. The amazed massing shade for the glacial valley, made from a single araucaria, that smashed its way by micrometers of birth push under 5 centuries of desks, of carbon dioxide and rainfall, while the volcanic rocks made landfall against this unrolled, harbouring roots. And the roots tucked the rocks in their arms and placed them magically like stone children about itself as it unfolded its marvellous tale of the wood heart mourned to flint by slow labour and loneliness, by what it could not reach yet see at distance, and of the sound of that sea, and of the cruel brightness of butterflies and grasses, foreknowledge of their brevity, of a herd stream overhearing prints of otters on its plain stones, gold wagtails sprang over the gravel and shallows of courtship, of orange blames of gall wasps, honey fungus, the watch turning of tree creepers, of blights of summer lightning, of fire damage, and that dark year's mark worn secretly, a ring, forged inside a ring. Then the winter's coronation, closing in a swaying crown of redwings, cones, drab diagonals of pinefall, the lead winds hardening. And while the stone children wept with rain, the great tree sheltered them.